Johan Carion wrote that the name Sorabi comes from the name Sarmati by replacing the letter. It is true that it is a matter of substituting letters, but it was not the name Sarmati that gave rise to Serbi, but the opposite. Like Carion, David Hitrey thought that Serbs got their name from Sarmatians. Vadianus says, there are two Sarmatians, Asian from Don and the Sea of Azov to the east, and European from Don to Germany and from the Baltic Sea to Danube. Yazigi and Dachans are Sarmatians. The Romans called the Geti Dachans. Well, the capital of Dachan and Geta was called Serbigetusha. Bergman says, the people of the Sarmatian branch are the ancestors of Slavs, Vends, and Lithuanians. Vadianus again. Scythia is generally called Sarmatia. Poland is part of Greater Sarmatia. For the Illyrians, Vadianus says that they are vulgarly called Slavs. Robert Latham says, under the name Sarmatians, we include Lithuanians and Slavs. The name Sarmatians is better than other names. Then Latham says, of all the Yaphets, the Sarmatians have preserved their old belief the longest. They speak the language closest to Sanskrit. Cyprian Robert says, the book Mater Verborum really says that the native inhabitants of Sarmatia were Serbs. I will dwell on the conclusion that the name Serbs was used exactly as the name Venedi to denote the entire Slavic race. Mentions Pliny and Ptolemy near the Sea of Azov, he says, these Russian Serbs are early as 9th century AD represented a great nation. For the tribes of Styria, Carniola, Carinthia and the Gulf of Venice, the same writer says, Venadim says that they call them not only Venadi but Serbs. And with that name they were especially called by German knights, the heirs of Charmanian. And then, as we have seen, the Slavs under name Venda at the same time live before Christ on the coast of Baltic, Yadran and Black Sea, and therefore geographers from the start of Christian era represents them as Serbs who occupied Poland and Old Prussia and in the same time steppes of southern Russia. Lukovic notes here that at that time there was no name of Poland, Czech Republic or Russia. Any area around Adriatic Sea where Sloveno-Serbi were saved until these days, today, their first and foremost name. Cyprian Robert also says this, Proto-Serbs from the lower Danube and from the Black Sea are the ancestors of all Slavs. Robert derives origin of the name Veneti, Venedi, Vindi from the name of the sun deity Vid in Slovenia. Soloviev says that ancient writers have preserved the tradition that the Sarmatians were descended from Med, and science confirms this tradition. The Sarmatians worshipped the sword and fire as deities. We have already explained the origin of the case of Med in detail. In addition to everything we have already stated, the claim that the Sarmatians are of Medic origin only tell us that they are the same people. However, it is more correct to say that the Meds are of Sarmatian origin. The fact that Soloviev states that the Sarmatians worshipped the sword and fire, so that was a general phenomenon among all Serbian tribe. The sword was a symbol of god of war, Areta, and fire was the god of the sun. Ancient writers said that the Scythian god of war was represented by the sword. We have already mentioned Vadianus' remark that Scythia is generally called Sarmatia. Another widespread religious symbol among the old Serbs was a ubiquitous role of the Tree of Life. It is not a simple view of the Druid oak, but a much more perfect understanding of the role of the tree as a future of the fertility of nature. The oak is often taken for the tree of life, but it's not the only one. In Bach's ritual, it is ivy. It is often an indeterminate tree in the form of an ornament. Soloviev further says that the most famous tribes of the Sarmatians were the Yazigi in the west and Roslani in the east, and then Bastarni, who were divided into three generations: Atmans, Sidons, and Pevtsinovs. Emperor Hadrian had to pay tribute to the Yazigis and Roxolani. The name Yazigi usually refers to Serbian tribes between the Danube and Tisa. The name originated from the language Jeziki and had the same meaning as the later name Slavs, famous for the same language. An important historical document in Nestor's timeline from the Pečarska Lavra, written in 11th century. The great advantage of that document is that Nestor, his writer, did not know older history, so he does not even mention Roxolana. He applies the Slavic name to all Serbian tribes according to the situation from the 11th century, and he calls those same tribes by the name of that time, names that did not exist 1,000 years earlier. Nestor says that all Slavs are originally from Illyricum, and the real history of Slavs begins with Trajan's conquests of Dacia. He says that, due to invasion of the enemy, the Vlachs, by whose name he means the Romans, Slavic tribes soared from the Danube to the northeast. From these Serbian people who left the Danube, 5 main tribes emerged: Poljani, Drevljani, Dragovići, Sloveni, Novgorodski, and Poločani. One tribe in the Danube region was called Lešani, after the forests, the wooded area where they lived. Such a name is found in Montenegro, Lješani, and in Serbian folk songs in the name of city of Leđani. Of these Lešans are Poljani, who settled in the fields around the Dniester River. Later Poles, Ljutići, Mazovians, and Pomorians are born from these fields. Drevljani were the neighbors of Poljani on Dniester, inhabited in wooded areas, and after that, as it is taught, they got the name Drevljani opposite Poljane. Marin Drinov thinks that Drevljani are from Tribal, in fact that Trivali are Drevljani. The Dragovići settled between the rivers Pripyat and Dvina. Parts of Dragovići tribe were still in Macedonia, near Thessalonica and in Bulgaria on river Dragovica, a tributary to Marica, then in northern Serbia, today in Germania. The Slavs of Novgorod are a special case. They were the only ones who did call themselves Slavs. Nestor says that those who settled around Lake Ilmen took the name Slavs. They called them Slavs. This is the first appearance of that name. They built the city of Novgorod, which became the capital of Russia. Regarding this, Soloviev says, the Slavs of Novgorod probably named themselves so that they would be different from the Finns who surrounded them. This is understandable simply in itself, because there were those in that area who spoke and those who did not. As the influence of Novgorod spread, so did the name of the Slavs in Russia, so that in 6th century it appeared as one of the names for the Serbian people. Those who settled on the river Poloti, tributaries of the Dvuna, were called Polokans. Those who settled on Desna, Semi, and Suli called themselves Severni or Severiani. From Poljani are Krivići, which are located at the source of Volga, Dvina, and Dniester, and have the city of Smolensk. Marin Drinov finds the Smoljan tribe on the Mesti river in Thrace. Among them are the Northerners. The Krivichi are closer to Kiev, and the northerners on the east bank of the Dniester on the Desna, Semi and Sula. From Krivichi in the south, along the Dniester and its tributaries, the northerners appear. This means that the northerners were first on the west side of Dniester, in the north, and then moved south to the east side of the same river. Šafarik calls northern Serbs Poljani, Drevljani, Dragovići. Slavs from Novgorod and Poljani had their own principality. These were two brothers with Leshan, Rodim or Radim and Vlatko or Vyatko. Those two brothers left each at the head of the part of the people and settled. Radim on Soja and Vlatko on Oka. The tribes Radimić and Vyatici are named after them. The migration under the leadership of those two mentioned brothers did not happen at the time of the conquest of Dacia, but earlier. From some earlier migration are also Bužani on the river Bug, which were later called Voljani, Duljebi, also on Bug. Uglici and Triverci on the Dniester and numerous tribes to the sea and the Danube. Soloviev says that Uglici and Triverci were very famous and Procopius and Jornandes called them Anti. A part of Leshan from the Danube region settled on Vistula. From the earlier Serbian tribes in modern Ukraine and those who came after the conquest of Dacia, 107 AD, Great Russians, Malorussians, Ukrainians, Belorussians, Polyaks, Lithuanians, Lettonians, and Pomorians or Pomeranians.